This program, Pandemic Pastimes, is based on a past exhibition at Swift Current Museum. I'd like to thank the City of Swift Current and Sask Culture Sask Lotteries for helping to support programs like this. 2020 was a very strange year. There were terrible natural disasters like the fires in Australia, damaging and deadly earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions, tornadoes, as well as climate disasters and explosions. Many of these events can take place in any year, but in 2020 they became a backdrop to the global spread of COVID-19. When the first people became ill in Wuhan, China, we were focused on the wildfires in Australia. On January 7th, the World Health Organization was notified of the novel coronavirus outbreak. By January 11th, China had recorded their first death. In Canada, the first case was recorded on January 25th. Saskatchewan had its first case on March 12th. On the 18th of March, Saskatchewan declared a state of emergency. All of the provinces did, but Canada did not, because under the Emergencies Act, the emergency must be of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of provincial governments to deal with it. Here is a brief reprise of what brought us to lockdown. January 7th, the World Health Organization was notified of the novel coronavirus, then known as 2019 nCoV, in China. January 11th, China recorded its first coronavirus death. January 20th, the first coronavirus case in the U.S. was reported in Washington State. January 23rd, Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, went under an unprecedented lockdown, impacting 11 million residents. February 11th, the World Health Organization named the coronavirus disease COVID-19. February 23rd, the first major coronavirus outbreak in Europe, in Italy, had 152 cases and 3 deaths, prompted emergency measures, locking down 10 towns in Lombardy. March 12th, we recorded our first case in Saskatchewan. Also on March 12th, all professional sports ceased to play. March 14th, the University of Regina suspended all classes. It resumed March 20th through distance teaching. March 16th, global infections and deaths from COVID-19 overtook those in China for the first time. 86,000 versus 80,860 infections, 3,241 versus 3,208 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University. Schools closed in Saskatchewan. Restrictions at hospitals and long-term care homes were established. On March 16th, Saskatchewan government declared a state of emergency. Gatherings of over 50 people were banned. Restaurants and bars were reduced to 50% capacity. Gyms, fitness centers, casinos, and bingo halls were closed. All non-urgent and elective surgeries, procedures, and diagnostics were postponed. On March 20th, police were told to enforce orders including self-isolation for international travelers. On March 23rd, restaurants were closed except for takeout, drive-through, and delivery. On March 25th, gatherings were reduced to 10 people. Also on March 26th, there was no bread at the Southside Co-op. March 27th, the number of COVID-19 cases in Saskatchewan reached 100. On March 30th, Saskatchewan recorded the first 2 deaths from COVID-19. On April 22nd, a cautious reopening in Saskatchewan was announced to begin in May. On May 4th, world leaders pledged $8 billion to research treatments and a vaccine for coronavirus COVID-19, with the US and Russia not taking part. By May 6th, at least 90,000 healthcare workers worldwide were infected by coronavirus COVID-19. More than 260 nurses have died, according to the International Council of Nurses. On June 18th, Canadian COVID-19 known cases passed 100,000, with 8,361 deaths. On June 28th, the global death toll from coronavirus COVID-19 passed 500,000, doubling in less than 2 months. July 16th showed a spike in cases in Saskatchewan Southwest and South Central. In the city of Swift Current, on March 17th, all leisure activities, including lessons and programming, were cancelled. This message was directed to city residents. Urgent. When using disinfectant wipes, please know that the wastewater plant has trouble processing them. They need to be disposed of in the garbage, not flushed down toilets. Wipes, including baby wipes, napkins, paper towels, and tissues, are clogging up pumps and equipment at the wastewater treatment plant. On March 18th, City Hall closed. Staff remained working with virtual services provided. On March 19th, all recreation and leisure facilities, including the iPlex, Fairview Arenas, Aquatic Center, Swift Current Museum, Art Gallery of Swift Current Library, Kinetic Park, Stockade, and Palliser Pavilion, were closed. On March 27th, City Council extended short-term financial relief and flexibility to all residential and commercial property tax and utility customers to September 30th. On March 29th, Kiwanis Skate Park closed. On April 3rd, city workers were allowed to work from home. April 8th, outdoor facilities, including tennis and pickleball courts, Highland Coulee bike trails, all city ball diamonds, and the community gardens closed. On April 27th, community services employees were deployed to parks. Here are some scenes from the lockdown. Physical distance sign in the Swift Current Mall. Temporary store closures. Maurice is locked up. Empty children's playgrounds. And the Lyric Theatre closed. On March 17th, the Swift Current Museum Facebook post read, "Everybody's at home to protect your lives. Now's a great opportunity to protect your memories as well. Sort your photos. Digital, cull bad or duplicate photos. Put in folders by date or subject. Identify each photo with who, what they're doing, where they were, date, and any stories related to the image. Save your photos in 3 different places so you have backup copies: external drive, cloud, and desktop. Photos from film, scan images and do as above. If you scrapbook the photos, use archival materials and do not use an ordinary pen. Use a pencil or an acid-free pen. Make sure you include the who, what, when, where, why, and stories, even if it means separate pages at the back of the book. You can store negatives in a fire-safe box. Your descendants and your museum will thank you, and you will have a trip down memory lane while you are doing it." The following day, March 18th, museum is closed to the public until further notice. Most staff are working from home until at least April 3rd. By April 27th, community services were not considered essential services, so staff were deployed to parks for the summer. There were product shortages here and around the world during the quarantine. Perhaps the most unusual product to disappear from store shelves was toilet paper. The United States, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the UK all experienced empty shelves in the toilet paper aisles. In fact, there was an armed robbery in Hong Kong to acquire toilet paper. Consumers feared supply chain disruption and the possibility of extended quarantines that would prevent them from purchasing toilet paper and related products. When people heard about shortages, they began panic buying. Toilet paper does not have any substitutes, so unlike food products, there is no viable alternative. Those who felt more threatened were more likely to have stocked up on toilet paper. Given that stockpiling is objectively unrelated to saving lives or jobs during a health crisis, this finding supports the notion that toilet paper serves as a purely subjective symbol of safety. Hoarding made people feel secure. As the population was warned about proper safety procedures during the pandemic, people began to collect the necessary products to stay safe. There was some hoarding, but the spike in the use of these products caught manufacturers off guard, so these products disappeared from the shelves. Diapers were also in short supply. The list of recommended things to have on hand included a thermometer, so these too disappeared from the shelves. Because they were stuck at home, many people decided to try cooking things that they normally did not have time to prepare. One of these things was bread. Yeast became impossible to find, so people turned to making sourdough bread. There were also flour shortages because of all the baking. Pasta shelves also began to empty because it has a long shelf life. Rice, which never goes bad, was also in short supply. COVID outbreaks in processing plants led to some meat shortages and high prices. Locally, Treens offered meat packages and the lineups were out the door. Soft drink companies began focusing on their core brands because the aluminum can industry could not keep up with the demand. With so many people at home, the consumption of those drinks was up more than 30%. Drinks like Pepsi Max, Dr. Pepper Cherry, Diet A&W Root Beer, and 7-Up Zero disappeared and slowly returned to shelves, some only in 2-liter plastic bottles. There was a run on hair dye when roots began to show before salons were allowed to open. Hospitals and clinics needed equipment to protect their workers. This equipment included ventilators, N95 masks, surgical masks, face shields, and hazmat suits. These pieces of personal protective equipment were in short supply worldwide, and collecting enough to supply hospitals in the event of an outbreak became very difficult. Canada was able to source some equipment from the United States and China, but have now planned to manufacture in Canada as provinces start to collect more equipment to prepare for a second wave. There are several words or expressions that were adopted as COVID-19 language. Most of these existed before, but were not as commonly used as they became during the quarantine. Probably the most used is unprecedented, which has been used by media, advertisers, and politicians on an almost daily basis. Challenging, difficult, and uncertain have also been used regularly. Advertisers and others love the phrases, "Now more than ever we're here for you," "We'll get through this together," and "We are all in this together." The word pandemic is not new, but is used constantly now because it means an epidemic occurring worldwide or over a very wide area, crossing international boundaries and usually affecting a large number of people. Cleaners now perform an enhanced clean, which includes the sanitization of all surfaces that may be touched. Essential businesses and those that have gradually reopened have installed protective screens, which are large plexiglass walls designed to protect workers from their customers. We have learned that our isolation, physical distancing, sanitizing, and mask wearing are intended to flatten the curve, which means that we will not overwhelm hospitals with a spike in cases. Social distancing refers to the 6-meter distance that is required between people. More recently, physical distancing is the preferred term. People regularly sanitize kitchens and bathrooms, although disinfecting is often not recommended because it lowers people's immunity. During COVID-19, however, we needed to sanitize our hands, counters, workplaces, and door handles on a regular basis. A bubble used to be a fragile, soapy globe. Today, it is also an individual small group of people with whom they are in contact. A cohort was a military unit of a Roman legion. It was composed of 480 soldiers. A cohort is roughly the equivalent of a modern military battalion. More recently, the word is used for any group with commonalities. In 2020, some schools were describing their groups of students as cohorts. Essential workers have been identified as people who work during quarantine so that the general population can buy food, drink, prescriptions, and other necessities. Often these workers are the lowest paid and the most precariously employed. WFH means working from home. When businesses began to open, contact tracing, collection of contact information in case visitors have been in contact with a positive case, became a regular practice. As the province began to gradually reopen services, new requirements were put in place to try to prevent transmission of COVID-19. Businesses installed plexiglass walls to create a barrier between patrons and staff. Hand sanitizers or hand washing stations became the norm in city businesses. Many businesses required patrons to wear a mask. At these businesses, staff also wore masks. The province later made mask wearing mandatory. Restaurants were allowed to offer socially distanced outdoor dining. Musicians began to offer socially distanced drive-in concerts and porch parties. Is working from home the new norm? Many people have continued to work from home at least part-time. The quarantine has proven that much work can be completed away from the physical workplace. In fact, many people found that they were more productive because there were fewer distractions. This may ultimately change the face of the workplace because workers would not need to live in large cities with exorbitant living expenses. They would have more flex time to balance the demands of home and work. Small businesses close to offices would be the losers in this case because there are many that depend on office traffic at lunchtime and after work. Many people were able to work from home. Some of these had small children and pets to contend with in their often makeshift offices. In some cases, this became a bit of entertainment during Zoom meetings. Some people set up makeshift offices in an area of their home with a bare wall behind them. This way, Zoom meetings would not include unfolded laundry. Zoom is not new, but it has become extremely popular for hosting virtual business meetings, family or friend get-togethers, co-video parties, and locktail hours. The term Zoom bomber refers to a person who crashes meetings or parties. Some new words have popped up that are specific to the COVID-19 experience. A COVIDiot describes a person who disregards the COVID safety measures and sometimes goes beyond that to risky behavior like attending COVID parties where one guest is infected and you attend to see if you will get infected as well. A quarantini is an after-work cocktail made after moving from working from home station to the kitchen. A drivecation is like a staycation, except you set up your trailer in your driveway and live in it for a while. Doom scrolling is scrolling through Facebook or another platform looking for the latest terrible things that 2020 had to offer. People's electronics provided the date, but not the day of the week. During quarantine, days seem to blur into one another, hence the term Blur's Day. There were also several specific actions that took place during the lockdown. Mongering was invented in Canada. It was a movement encouraging acts of kindness, especially to help vulnerable people during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanking healthcare workers worldwide included ringing bells, cheering at prescribed times, and painting murals. People placed hearts in business and residential windows. Rescues and SPCAs saw an upsurge as people began acquiring pets to keep them company during the quarantine. Wine ninjas were groups who would put together a wine-themed goodie bag and take it to one of their members. They would put it on the porch, ring the doorbell, and run away. Singing on balconies started in Italy and spread to many other places. In Swift Current specifically, Kinetic Park had a virtual Frontier Days that included the following: a beard growing contest, which was a nod to the beard growing contest of the first Frontier Days, a self-guided parade tour where businesses and individuals built float-like displays based on the theme Spirit of the West, a Taste the Fair week where local eateries served fair-style food, and a talent show contest, as well as coloring, poster, and t-shirt design contests. The Swift Current Pandemic Support Network started in mid-March 2020. We were particularly concerned about people in our community who had limited access to the internet, reliable health information, or a network of nearby relatives and friends. We were also concerned with how people would get food and other basic necessities if they were in isolation. They expected 25 people to join, but there were hundreds of members within 24 hours and 4,400 members as of September 2020. What started as a small project evolved into a major network of community members and professionals in southwest Saskatchewan. It became a major method of communication for our MP Everett Hindley to communicate with the public and answer their questions. Using the network, people helped each other find essential supplies during shortages and lockdown. People sought and received advice from community members and local business people on accessing CERB and other emergency financial assistance. Local physicians and pharmacists shared health-related advice and advice about where to access health care. The network also helped connect people and organizations who needed volunteers. Began to criticize regional Hutterites following COVID-19 outbreaks. Scott Lamb and Chance Candrood organized a drive through the Swift Current colony to show support. About 30 vehicles participated in the parade, including farmers, business owners, police, and firefighters. Lamb said, "Often Hutterite colonies are the first people to fill a food bank. They're often the first people to a fire. We are definitely better with them around." What did people do during the pandemic lockdown? With no opportunities to go out to restaurants, bars, concerts, movies, or sports events, people looked for ways to entertain themselves at home. With lots of time to prepare food, people began to experiment. Baking bread became especially popular. When yeast disappeared from the grocery shelves, many people took that as an opportunity to learn how to make sourdough bread. Many people took the opportunity to learn a new skill like macrame or woodworking. Some participated in virtual classes. Proficient crafters, like those who regularly crocheted, produced a lot of new pieces. Many professional artists took the opportunity to create large bodies of work. Many people took the opportunity to begin to learn to play musical instruments. Professionals practiced and wrote music. Many musicians began to live stream performances. As spring approached, many people turned their thoughts to gardening. People who had never had time to work in the yard began planting gardens. Garden centers were very busy. There was even a shortage of ceramic planting pots. In yards and along paths, people began to take note of the birds. Some people who had never paid much attention to birds began to feed them to increase the pleasure of being in the yard. Many professional photographers began taking porch portraits, although many voiced concerns, including the proximity of an unmasked photographer to families who would also not be wearing masks. Jigsaw puzzles were in short supply at the beginning, as many purchased several to fill hours of spare times. Video games, online games, and game apps increased in usage. The game Animal Crossing became extremely popular among young adults who were seeking a break from the bad news that 2020 had become known for. Board games were popular in households with several people. Netflix, Crave, and other streaming platforms were in great demand because there were no movies to attend and new seasons on television were not being filmed due to the pandemic. Many people took the opportunity to catch up on books they owned but had never gotten around to reading. When days blurred into one another, naps were a popular way of taking a break. Some people have gym equipment like weights and treadmills at home, but others simply set up challenges in their yard to keep active. Some sports equipment was not available during the quarantine because stores like Walmart and Sport Chek sold out. This family showed ingenuity by building weights out of concrete forms. Zoom and FaceTime meetings worked well for working adults. Younger people connected on Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, Tumblr, and so on. Mystery Mansion Escape Rooms in Regina runs a trivia night at the Lancaster Tap House. They ran online trivia during the quarantine with discount codes to order food from the tap house. This allowed participants from farther afield to join. Their escape rooms also went online and had participants from Europe. Many people lost their jobs. As businesses closed during the quarantine period, they worried about their finances and had to lay off staff to lessen the blow. Many people were left unemployed without warning. They were dealing with quarantine along with the added stress of how to pay rent and food. The federal government established the CERB program to provide for their basic needs. In many cases, landlords were not allowed to evict tenants who had not caught up on their rent. The money that all levels of government spent to lessen the blow will have to be paid for when the crisis ends, but it is important to have taken care of these people when they needed it, as they are the future workers and consumers who will drive the economy. One service, the loss of which became obvious to everyone, was getting a haircut. Even though people were in quarantine, those working were often attending Zoom meetings, so their shaggy hair, often in need of coloring as well, began to frustrate many people. Some people attempted home haircuts, not always with the greatest success. There were no movies in theaters. In Swift Current, Cinema Twins sold popcorn for pickup to help support the business. Restaurants closed. Many offered delivery or takeout to try to make ends meet. Concerts and other performances were canceled. Some performances were available virtually. As restrictions began to lift, many performers started offering porch concerts. Bars were closed, but liquor stores were deemed an essential service, so they remained open. There were parties on Zoom, but most people were restricted to having a cocktail with other adults in their household. Sports were canceled or postponed. Professional leagues like hockey and basketball were able to start playing again by keeping their teams in a bubble. The Toronto Blue Jays were not allowed to play in Toronto, so they found a stadium in the US. The CFL was slow to plan, and ultimately they were not able to play. Gyms closed, leaving many people with limited options for exercising. Some had home equipment and some improvised. Because the weather was mild, many people walked. Some services that were not available were more serious. Elective surgeries were cancelled, leaving people in pain for an indeterminate period. In Canada, some people recently diagnosed with cancer lost precious months waiting for treatment. Dentists only took urgent cases. People with braces would have to keep them on longer than expected because the orthodontist's office was closed. No physiotherapy meant that people could not recover from injuries as quickly. The ban on visiting long-term care homes took its toll on families and residents, especially those suffering from Alzheimer's disease. People were not allowed to have funeral home visitations or funerals, which made it harder to grieve losses. A sense of humor helps to lessen stress. This has showed up in memes on the internet. The first memes were about hand washing, followed swiftly by toilet paper jokes. Some of these memes are directed to specific generations and specific interests. There were many memes about day drinking as well as memes using foul language that were funny but not ideal museum content. Here are a selection of memes. Hand washing. Family devastated when pet chews up life savings. Me in 20 years when a Charmin commercial comes on. This is a toilet paper joke for boomers. Young people do not understand this one. You have to have seen the movie to get this one. Experts recommend keeping your daily rituals even when working from home. I'm going to the store. Do you want anything? Tensions are high in the produce section as no one dares to lick their fingers. Telling your suitcase there's no vacation this year can be tough. Emotional baggage is the worst. Free hammocks all over town. It's like a miracle. The virus won't last forever. The virus? As the quarantine stretched on, many memes featured darker humor. Later in 2020, people were fed up, and this is the type of meme people were making. The following are some of the photographs submitted by participants who wanted to show what they did during the first lockdown. The photos are positive. People were pretty positive during the first lockdown because they believed that if they followed protocols, they would soon beat the virus. Antoinette Esterhazen took her daughter for a walk. They collected interesting things, and her daughter made pictures using the objects. Jennifer Dussault's daughter attended a virtual dance class. Ellie Roccoci made a fruit pie. Kids were sent out to do some yard work. Alex McPhee wrote to many towns asking for their town pins. Kids played in the water. Families went for a walk and chalked positive messages on the sidewalk. Nicole Spence's kids couldn't go to the rink, so they played hockey on the frozen slough. Vicky Powell's kids painted rocks and hid them around town. Bobby Jo Knakowski taught her child to bake. Krista Erickson's kids were missing the fair, so they set up a little fair in their yard. Our winner from the submissions is Victoria Brown. They adopted a new puppy during the quarantine. This shows the growth and bonding of both their son and the puppy over a few months of quarantine. This photo by Corla Roccoci shows my favorite example of ingenuity. Urban Ground asked clients to drop their money in a bucket of sanitizer to protect their staff. As the months have worn on, that positivity has worn off. There are more expressions of frustration even in our region, which has had more businesses open than many places in Canada. The virus is tricky, and as people wait to be vaccinated, mutated versions of COVID-19 have appeared. We all have to mask up, wash our hands, maintain our distance, and patiently wait until we find a new normal.